Hey guys, this is Alex Awari from ONG Tax and Accounting Services. So if you're watching this video or you're listening to me, chances are that you are a foreign owner of a US single member LLC, and for some reasons you've actually missed the deadline for filing the pro forma 1120 and the 5472, or you even filed it late. And one of the questions you keep asking yourself is, how do I avoid the $25,000 penalty? This is a good question, and we've come across so many questions that we're going to address in this video, especially when foreign owners of US single member LLC misses the deadline and they file late. They have a lot of questions. So we've been able to gather some of these questions, and we're going to address them and answer them to the best of our knowledge. Now, before we start, let me just throw a word of caution out there and give some few information that this video is for educational purposes only, and it's not meant to be a legal or tax advice. If at any point in time you need a legal or tax advice, you should always consult an attorney or a CPA who's going to help you figure some of this out. Now, finally, this video is only going to address late filings or missed deadlines for foreign owners of US single member LLC. We're not going to talk about 5472 in cases where you have a US corporation, or in cases where your LLC has elected to be a corporation, or where you have a foreign corporation that's engaged in US trade or business and it's required to file a 5472 in terms of reportable transactions that it may have. So we're not going to address all of those entities that we talked about. For the purpose of this video, we're only going to address LLCs, which are also called disregarded entities, US single member LLCs, or LLCs that have not elected to be treated as a corporation. So we're only talking about a disregarded entity and not corporations or LLCs that have elected to be a corporation. Now, one of the most important questions we get whenever a foreign owner of a US single member LLC misses the deadline is they ask questions about the consequences of the delayed submission. Now I'm late and I'm going to file these forms. What next? Or what happens? Now, I would say that the fact that the return is late does not mean that you should completely ignore your filing requirement. Each of the situations that I'm going to mention right now invites the $25,000 penalty. I mean, that is number one, filing early but filing an incorrect return. So if the return is substantially incomplete, you could get a $25,000 penalty. The second one here is filing late or missing the deadline. And then the number three, which most people do a lot, is not filing the return at all whenever it's late. So these are the three situations that could cause you to get a $25,000 penalty. Now let's talk about those three issues that I just labeled out: filing the incorrect late returns or the missing the deadline. With the incorrect return or the late filed returns, there is a reasonable cause argument you can make. Whatever caused you not to file these returns on time or file it incorrectly, if you know the reasons and the reasons are very reasonable, you could put them in writing, and whenever you get slapped with a penalty, you can explain it correctly. But in most cases, I would advise that when you're drafting this kind of reasonable cause argument, you need to hire an attorney or a CPA who knows what they're doing to be able to help you out. When you file these incorrect returns or late filed returns, one can also read between the lines that you are trying to be a law-abiding taxpayer. You're doing everything in a reasonable sense, that you have completed the required compliance even though the returns are late, and you're following the law. So making a reasonable cause argument may be a little bit good for you, because whoever is reviewing it may also look at your compliance history and the effort that you've made to be compliant in this case. Alright, so we'll talk about the third option, and this is the option for people that intentionally disregard the rules They know the rules, they've heard about it, but they would intentionally decide not to file. Not filing the tax return at all is a risk. As a tax preparer or a tax professional, I would never advise any of my clients to take that action because it severely goes against the rules and the regulations set by Congress. It may also be difficult for you to request for forgiveness or abatement if the IRS catches up in the future. One is going to ask me, how is the IRS going to catch up in the future? It is very simple and intuitive. When you are a foreign owner of a single member LLC, in most cases, when you form the LLC, you don't have a social security number. And so in your SS4 application, you actually put in, non-resident alien or foreign US or any of those descriptions that shows you're a foreign person that owns an LLC. If the IRS really want to catch up in the future, all they have to do is probably go into the SS4 applications and then look at within the responsible parties box or the field that you completed. All they needed to do is to look at whether any of the descriptions in the responsible parties identification number is foreign US or non-resident alien, and then they can tie that up to go into the system to see if you've actually filed the information returns or not. That's what I'm thinking, that the IRS may be able to catch up in the future. One way they could also catch up in the future is if you already have a filing history and then you missed 1 year filing, they may ask themselves questions about why did you file the other years, and then the following year we're not getting any forms from you. So that could also be another reason. If you have already filed a final return, you've checked the right box and you've stated that the LLC is filing a final return, that basically stops all filing inquiries. If you have dissolved your LLC and you've not filed a final return, there is a presumption that the IRS is always expecting an information return to be filed. So these are some of the ways that I'm thinking that the IRS may be able to catch up in the future in case you haven't filed these forms. Now, another important question I get asked a lot is whether, based on my professional opinion, whether these taxpayers or these filers should be filing this late return. So the question is very simple. Now they know the return is late, and they are asking my opinion as to whether they need to file these late returns. Now here's what I'm going to say. The rules are very clear, and it says that a 25% owned single member LLC formed in the US that is owned by a foreign person and it's a single member that has a reportable transaction must file this form 5472. So as you can see, not every LLC is required to file these forms. To file these forms, you must have a reportable transaction. So if you don't have a reportable transaction, then there is really no need to file these forms. In the other videos that I have done, I have explained a little bit about what a reportable transaction is, so you can actually go and watch it and figure out whether some of your activities falls into those kind of reportable transactions description that we've given in those videos. The law also states that you're required to file Form 5472 for each foreign or domestic related party with which you've had a reportable transaction during the tax year. As a CPA who is authorized to practice before the IRS, I have the duty to promptly inform my client of any non-compliance, error, or omission and advise the client regarding the consequences under the code and the regulation. However, the ultimate decision relies on you, the taxpayer. You probably have to weigh all your options, look at your risk tolerance, and see if you want to file these late returns or not. My job is to tell you what the law says and the consequences. So if you ask me, my professional opinion is to follow what the law says. The law says that if you are a foreign owner of a single member LLC and the LLC has a reportable transaction with either the members or the related parties, then you need to file these forms. It does not matter if the form is late or not, you still need to file it to come into compliance. So this question also gets asked a lot. How is the IRS enforcing the law on late returns? And I have explained how they can enforce it. They can enforce it by going through the SS4 applications and figuring out which of these LLCs apply for EIN and where the EIN responsible party was stated as a non-resident alien or a foreign US description in the SS4. They can do that. They could also go back and check other LLCs that have filed this pro forma 1120 in the past, but then fast forward to some other years they did not file. So they can check your filing history and see why you're not filing for some years, and then maybe I come back and ask questions. Again, that is my opinion on how I think they can enforce the law. But here's my experience. After working with thousands and thousands of foreign owners of US single member LLCs from all over the world, I am yet to see how the IRS enforces these penalties, especially for foreign owned single member LLCs. We have seen many cases where a corporation or an LLC with a corporate election has filed late 5472 and have instantly or automatically received the 5472 penalties. But we've not seen cases for foreign-owned single-member LLCs. Today's date is June 1, 2022. As of June 1, 2022, I've never seen any kind of penalties for foreign-owned US single-member LLCs. Maybe it could be in the future. If you're listening to me in the future, there could be a case where the IRS maybe will be enforcing the rules and then will be coming up with a penalty. Everything that I have said so far should not be construed as absolute assurance that a penalty will not be imposed or assessed, because it is actually in the rules and regulations that the IRS should be enforcing these penalties. So the fact that you have filed your information return late and you have not received any penalties does not mean that it may not happen. It could happen or it could not happen. One of the things also that I hear a lot of people saying is, I formed this LLC maybe 5 years ago. I've never filed these forms and the IRS have never sent me any penalty. Again, you may be lucky, but as to how long that is going to continue, we don't know. So if you want to be compliant, you have to read the laws and follow it. Being compliant is very important when you're dealing with the US tax system. I would also say that the assessment or the imposition of these penalties is at the discretion of the IRS. So you could file late and someone may review it and decide not to slap you with a penalty, and that's fine. But then you always want to be compliant. So I'm going to show you, since we have seen many of these penalties for corporations and LLCs that have elected corporation status, I'm going to show you how the penalties looks like when it comes in the notice. And then I would also show you some success stories that we've also had in abating some of these penalties for corporations and LLCs that have a corporate election. Okay, so here is an example of one corporation that received these forms. So when you get these notices, it usually comes in CP215, and it's going to state your tax period that you're being charged penalty. It's going to state a whole lot of information, and then it will tell you that we charge you a penalty under section 6038A of the Internal Revenue Code, and it will let you know the reason why they're charging you the penalty. So for this case, this corporation was being charged $25,000 penalty for failure to provide information with respect to 5472. This is a very generic statement, but it comes in so many forms. If you file late, you will get this same information. If you don't file it and the IRS catches up, this information may also be provided. So it is not just failure to provide information, but it's also, you get that same message here. You get this same reason here when you file late. So the reason here is usually general. It's very generic. So you just need to be aware of that. So it tells you the penalty that's being assessed. Another one that I'm going to show you is this one. When they send you that penalty notice, right? This is a different company. But when they send you that notice, the CP215, and you do not respond, after some time, the letters that you'll be receiving becomes more aggressive. So in this case, we have another client that received the same letters, but in this case, this person got $50,000 penalty because he had two shareholders who are related parties, and he has a related party transaction and failed to file those forms on time. And so we multiply 25,000 by 2, you get 50,000. So you have the 50,000 penalty, and then you have the interest that has accrued because they did not respond on time. This is how this penalties looks like. The first one comes in as CP215, and then subsequently, if you do not respond, the messages that you receive from the IRS becomes more intense, right? So for in this case, there is a warning that there's a notice of intent to seize or levy the property if they don't pay on time. So the forms, when they come in, they give you valuable information on how to proceed. So for example, it's going to tell you why you're receiving the penalty. It's also going to tell you that if you do not agree with a penalty assessment, you can write a letter. You can write a letter and provide a reasonable cost statement within 30 days. Here, it's telling you what your right is when you receive this kind of penalties. Okay, so for instance, it says that if you believe your reasonable cost exists and you want us to consider removing this penalty, then you do all of the stuff that's mentioned here. Now let's go again and see other helpful information that the IRS provide. So after they've slapped you with this penalty, they try as much as possible to also help you, give you more information about what to do next. Here, it also says that you can find more information about reasonable cost statement for this penalty, and it gives you the code that you could use to find some reasonable cost information. So if you need any assistance, you can also call this number 267-941-1000. But generally, with my experience, if you really want to save time, avoid calling these numbers unless you really want some information about a tax return that you filed and need some response on it. But if you're calling the IRS to give you an advice on reasonable cost statement, I would advise that you rather hire a CPA or an attorney who is going to be able to help you. Now, I've shown you the penalties. Let me also show you what happens in case your reasonable cost argument becomes successful. So here's an example of one other client that got this penalty, and then we help them in abating the penalty. As you can see, the letter says that we are pleased to inform you that your request to remove the form 5472 penalty has been granted. Here's where you need an expert. You need an expert. You need an attorney or a CPA who is going to help you when you get yourself into a very difficult situation like this. And we're always here to help. Okay, so we're moving on. Here's another loaded question. I have a client that recently asked me this question, and this question is really loaded. Here's how it goes. So are you saying that you filed some returns which are late and they did not have to pay anything because IRS has not enforced any penalties? Is a 25K fine something I would have to pay, or does it depend? How do I find out? What I would say is that unlike the corporations and the LLCs that have elected to be corporations where there is a very streamlined and automated system for e-filing these forms, these foreign-owned single-member LLC pro forma forms cannot be e-filed. You can either mail it in or you fax it. So the penalties for this LLCs are not automatic. It's not like the corporations where you e-file it and within 4 weeks time you get a penalty notice in the mail. For the LLCs, because you have to fax it and mail it, the IRS have a whole bunch of documents to go through before they slap you with a penalty. So the penalties for the single member LLCs, in my opinion and my experience, they are not automatic. It has to be assessed before payment becomes possible. We are also not aware of any procedures that the IRS have in place for checking these penalties. A lot of people ask me, how do I find out if I have a penalty? I don't know. Okay. And you probably may be lucky calling the IRS to figure out whether they know. But I haven't come across any client of mine that has been successful in getting to know whether they have a penalty or not. So I will continue by saying that when you're filing a late return, you do not have to pay anything instantly. Do not attach any check to your late return. You don't have to pay any $25,000 to the late return that you're filing. You only have to pay unless the IRS has requested you to do so. And even with that option, I would still tell you not to pay if you have a reasonable cause argument. If the IRS is requesting you to pay and you believe you have a reasonable cause argument and you do not want to pay and you cannot pay, you need to put all your reasons into writing and tell the IRS. Basically protest it, appeal if possible, and tell the IRS why you think that you don't deserve to pay these penalties. And if your reason is good enough, you go through all the administrative procedures, and then if the IRS understands your argument and think your reasons are very reasonable, then they would approve your reasonable cause statement. If it's not, then they continue to drag on to appeals, and then if appeals also doesn't help out, you could also take it to the tax court. So the tax court basically becomes where things get a little bit messy, where you may need an attorney. Now, but before it gets to the tax court, you have to be able to exhaust all the administrative and legal procedures available within the IRS system. Finally, even when the penalties are imposed, you are not required to immediately pay if you wish to protest the penalties. If you wish to protest the penalty, then definitely hire a CPA or an attorney to help you protest it. They know all the administrative procedures you need to go through to figure out, the best course of action for you in terms of this penalty. But if your intention is to file these late returns and attach a check, please do not do that. Just wait for them to assess the penalty before you even think of paying them. And even before you pay them, try and do some consultation with a CPA or an attorney to figure out whether you really need to pay or whether there could be a reasonable cause argument that could remove you out of that difficult situation of paying. Now, another question is whether the US Streamlined Procedures or the amnesty programs is a possible option, and whether it's applicable for foreign owners of US single-member LLCs. Now, I would say that I'm not aware of any existing amnesty program for foreign-owned single-member LLCs. Okay, the streamlined procedures that this person is asking is generally applies to US taxpayers who are delinquent with their tax return, and it does not apply to foreign owners of US single-member LLCs. Another great question that I get is whether you should file now and then try to either use the reasonable cause statement to abate the late filing penalty, or if there's any other possible viable strategy that you could use as your line of defense. Now, here's what I'm going to say. It really does not hurt to attach a statement. However, my experience has been that the IRS generally does not pay attention or read such attachment. What I advise people to do is you must first file the forms, then leave it up to the agency to impose or not to impose the penalties. Now, when they impose the penalty, you can then prepare and send your reasonable cause statement. The assessment, as I have said from the beginning, is not automatic, and the IRS review these forms on a case-by-case basis, per my opinion. Okay, so another good question here. Could you, as a CPA, or if you've hired an attorney, can they possibly help you avoid the hefty late filing penalties? Here's my opinion. Where the return is already late, a CPA or an attorney cannot proactively save you from the late filing penalty. A CPA or attorney cannot make an absolute promise on the success of the abatement. You have the option to first file the forms and wait to see if any penalty has been assessed. Once the penalty has been assessed or imposed, you and the CPA or the attorney can then enter into a separate agreement or contract or arrangement to resolve the issue. But then one thing that I think it's very important for you to note is that a CPA or an attorney cannot guarantee 100% success when it comes to abating some of these penalties. Because the reason is simple. The CPA or the attorney who is drafting that abatement letter is not the IRS agent who is going to be reviewing your reasonable cause statement. So they cannot be the judge and the jury in this process. You have a third party reviewing it, and if your reasonable cause argument is good enough, then you get approved and they abate the penalty. If it's not good, then you still continue going through the administrative process of trying to get it abated. A CPA or an attorney can only do their best. They will be your advocate, they will work in your best interest, but the ultimate abatement decision lies with the IRS and not the CPA or the attorney. Alright, so I hope that I've been able to answer some of these very important questions that you have with regards to filing a late pro forma 1120 and 5472. If you have any questions or you have any concerns, please feel free to send me an email or use the link below to book an appointment with me. Once again, the name is Alex Owari, and I'll talk to you some other time on some other video. Bye for now.